The next teaching of Jesus on righteousness is one of the most controversial and heavily discussed of all of them. So this is the Sermon on the Mount and non-violent retribution. As we reach Jesus' fifth exegesis on the greater righteousness from Torah, we are confronted with the exegesis that probably has the most variance in its interpretation. And it really wrestles with what does it mean to have honor in a society that is rooted in honor and shame. But before we get to that, this law starts with a quote of what is a very well-known phrase, an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. Now, contrary to what most people think about this phrase, it is not saying that if someone takes your eye, you should take their eye. If someone breaks your tooth, you should break their tooth. That's not what it's saying. In fact, its context in the Old Testament fits in very much with a law concept in the ancient world called lex talionis. The idea behind this law is that it limited the level of retribution. So the point of an eye for an eye is that the limit of your retribution for taking someone's eye is to have your eye taken. If they tried to take both your eyes, they went too far in their retribution. So the whole point, an eye in the case of an eye being taken, a tooth in the case of a tooth being taken, is supposed to be the legal limit that somebody could go to. It's supposed to put a limit on the level of retribution. And the point behind it is to stop someone going too far in revenge and retribution. Now, Jesus' examples, though, really seem to flip this on its head. And he gives three examples here. The first, if someone hits you on one cheek, don't do any kind of retribution. Turn and give them the other cheek. If someone takes your cloak, people in those days wore two cloaks, an outer and an inner. If someone takes your outer cloak, give them your inner cloak. If a Roman soldier asks you to take his pack for a mile, take it 2. Probably noticed pretty quickly, these are not acts of retribution. In fact, the absolute opposite seems to be happening. In each case, rather than having retribution against, we seem to be in a place where Jesus is saying, look, the greater righteousness does not take retribution at all. Now back to this point about honor, shame, society. The culture of Jesus' time was a culture rooted in the idea of you being a person of honor or a person of shame. And acts that you did were either acts of honor or acts of shame. What is interesting in each of these acts is the person receiving the initial blow is being shamed and steps themselves further into shame. Gets slapped on a cheek. This isn't like a fight, a punch on the nose. The slap on the cheek was very much understood in the ancient world to be an offense against your honor, saying that you're a person of shame. And there's this action of kind of almost embracing the shame. Again, with the tunic, it's no longer I have just one tunic on, so I'm a little bit shamed because I don't have my second tunic. But now I'm completely naked and unclothed and brought into deeper shame. And then the final one, there's this idea of the oppressing nation, the Romans, the people who are oppressing my people, asked me to do this oppressive act that I don't get any reward for. I'm being forced to carry the soldier's pack for a mile without any recompense. I'll walk even deeper into shame and let them oppress me for 2 miles. And this is really hard for us to wrestle with as people of God. But kind of part of the message here is don't value your honor. Don't value how people view you over your value to the kingdom, your ministry to the kingdom. Now, I should say here there have been some other interpretations that are worth mentioning. One came out of some scholarship I saw by a guy by the name of Walter Wink. who's around in the 80s, and he talks about how these actually are all acts that not only subvert you into shame, but they subvert shame onto the person. So there's this idea of, turn and face the other cheek. Well, because they only used one hand in that process, now ask them, instead of backhanding them like an inferior, hit them with the front of your hand like an equal. Or maybe with the two cloaks, maybe my nakedness doesn't just shame me, but it shames you for seeing it. Or maybe the Roman soldier has been told, you get locusts to carry for a mile. You can't carry those packs for more than a mile. So carry them for a second mile can kind of get the soldier into trouble. So understand there are some other ways of reading this passage. Is this shame actually subversive and providing some kind of resistance? I'm not 100% sure and complete on that. But what I do know is in each time, there is no retribution. There is no trying to go eye for an eye. There is no trying to go tooth for a tooth. Jesus says, don't value your honor. Don't value the things you own. Don't worry about what other people think of you. What matters is your wholeness, your completeness in God. And the biggest hint that this really is about not wanting to own our possessions and not doing retribution over possessions and honor is in that last verse. It says, if someone's begging, give. If someone asks to borrow something of yours, give. Now there's this idea of put aside what you own because the kingdom is greater. And whilst this challenges us, it's probably worth us remembering that Jesus came, and even in the midst of being murdered, forgave those murdering him. Jesus is the ultimate example, once again, of this greater righteousness. He was willing to give up absolutely everything he had, even his life, for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of greater righteousness. In many ways, this is a pointer to what will happen on the cross in the Gospel of Matthew. So whilst we may struggle with it, we may try and dance around it, the reality is Jesus lived out this value of no retribution. Instead, he's going to push towards love and forgiveness, as we'll see in the next exegesis on righteousness. So as we reflect on the greater righteousness today, let us remember that the kingdom of God is what we want to pursue. The kingdom of God, its righteousness, its wholeness, its completeness. That is where our value is. That is where our honor is. Not in our possessions or what other people do to us.